Okay, we've made it to the panel where most of the action happens. The implant planning panel is where a lot of planning can happen. There's a lot of options, and we're going to go through all of them step by step here. So we've entered this case where we have upper and lower anatomy. We've done even a wax up tooth. We've mapped the nerves. Now it's time to plan an implant and decide size, shape, and so on, positioning. So first things first, the pando curve in its current state is not very useful. So I'm going to select that MIP again, which is the maximum intensity projection. And the way I use my pando curve in my implant planning is as a navigation tool. So if I want to quickly get around the mouth, I can click and drag or click on a certain spot to take a look. Okay, and it's going to snap all my other views to that spot. There are other layouts available. So if we go back to the main layout in the toolbar, we have many, many layouts available. I prefer this one that has the 3D rendering, the panoramic curve, and the 3 slices here, but there are other options. Also, keep in mind, we can change, for instance, if your preference is to have this in 3 slices, you can change that in this mini toolbar inside the panel view. Okay, so let's take a look just briefly at this 3x1, which is a popular configuration. If we have a 3x1, we can choose the thickness, which we should still keep probably at 0.3, which is the smallest thickness, but the spacing might change. So let's say you want all of your slices to be 1.3 millimeters apart. And what we'll see if we zoom in and take a look at our axial slice, see how there's now a yellow and a teal as well as a blue, and notice a yellow outline here, a blue outline, and a teal outline. So this is showing us how far apart those slices are. We can change the spacing to 5 millimeters and notice how they get further and further apart. So most people are using them in pretty tight, so we'll keep it at 0.3. And then we can kind of, as we're scrolling through, you'll be able to see maybe the entire implant, mesial, distal, and center in one kind of shot. Okay, I'm going to put that back on 1:1 for now. Now we have a couple things going on here. I'm going to go ahead and right click and hide my top object. Because I now have this wax up tooth, I really don't need the upper occlusion, because that's why I made this wax up tooth. And remember that we selected where number 29 was and we put a tooth in number 19. Now you'll notice on our odontogram, those 2 teeth have a light blue color. So generally, if you skip the teeth setup, which you totally can, and it may be faster in some instances, if you scroll anywhere in the viewing software, let's say we just overlay it on number 23, okay, and we click a tooth, and we are naming what that tooth is. So I could click number 23 here, and you'll see it keeps me lined up where I was, and now I can plan and place my implant depending on what kind of implant I'm looking to place. We have an entire library here, but it has it over number 23. I'm going to hit cancel and show you one other thing. However, if you're over 23 and you hit number 18, for instance, it's still going to be over number 23, wherever you had told it was. And if you were to take the time to place this implant and choose the size, length, and brand you want and hit apply, you'll notice that while it's under number 23, it's labeled as number 18. So one of the advantages of the teeth setup is it automatically pre-labels and knows where those teeth are, where otherwise you have to just navigate to the site yourself and choose the correct tooth. Not the end of the world, but it's something to keep in mind. Now, let's say you did this and you're doing a full arch case, or you just mislabeled the one. You can right click on the green tooth here and change the tooth number and change it to be the appropriate one. And that'll put it, that way when you're clicking on it, it will center on the correct space. Okay, I'm going to right click and delete the implant because we do not need that implant at all. Now let's say, for instance, we're right at the midline and I want to click on number 29, which has already been told the software where it is. So rather than placing the implant here at the midline of the mandible, if I click number 29, it remembers that I told it where 29 was. So it takes me roughly to that space where I put that little bobble, if you remember. So now we can drag our implant down. And generally, we can choose this little 4 arrow thing in the center of our implant, and that allows us to bodily move the implant in both ways here. Okay, and you also have these angles at the top and the bottom to change the angle, and then same thing here on this slice to change the angle in the other dimension, so 90 degrees apart. Something to take a peek at now that we're in the implant library. We have a massive library of different implant brands. If your implant brand is not here, you can choose 3DM, and they have a generic line. And so here they have pretty much every size possible. So if you want to just place a generic implant, you could do that here. Okay, if your particular implant brand that you place is in here, like for instance BioHorizons, you'll click this little cloud button to download the library to each computer, which can take some time. So do it on when there's not a patient in the chair. And you can then choose if that brand has actually given Acteon all of their files, we can have the exact image for that implant. Okay, so that's the nice thing about pre-telling it where a tooth is that you don't have to navigate to it. So it's a little bit faster in that regard. Okay, what else? What's nice about this main view here, the slider at the bottom will actually spin all the way around the implant, so we can make sure that we have the correct biologic spacing, not only buccolingually like we see here, but we can turn 90 degrees and make sure we like the spacing between the roots. And we can see the nerve outline here, that purple nerve that's quite deep on this patient. You also have a separate layout option. So now if we come up to layout, we have two options. One is the one we're in now, which is the preview of the implant itself, the cross-sectional slice and the tangential slice, or 90 degrees to the cross-sectional. You can also turn on the 3D rendering. So if you wanted to simultaneously look at the 3D rendering, we could say, oh my gosh, I'm actually pointed way too far to the mesial. Let me correct that by coming over here and angling that correctly. Okay. Alternatively, you can click on the implant in the 3D and you can actually bodily move it here as well. Okay. So if you wanted to move the implant in the rendering and then fine tune it in the X-ray version, you could do that as well. Okay. So that's the initial how we get into the implant library. Choose your implant. Once you're happy with it, we're going to hit apply. And now you can still move that implant at any point by clicking on the implant. We can click on this little bobble and drag in the 3D rendering. We can also, in any of the slices here, we can click the angles, or we can bodily move the implant by grabbing that middle directional pad as well. Okay. Now let's do the one that has the wax up. So we're going to go ahead and just click number 19. It automatically takes us roughly to the space number 19. You can see in the rendering where it takes us, puts us right in the middle of the tooth. And what's nice about this is that you have the outline in white of the tooth. And so we also have the 3D rendering. So for planning, as we should, for restoratively driven implant placement, we can make sure that our future crown is going to have a screw retained access point right in the central groove, for instance. Okay. So depending on whatever implant size you prefer, here's a 5.2 by 12. We can fine tune and tweak. And depending on if you're doing guided surgery, you might spend more time doing the fine tuning here. This video series is not going to go into the guided module. That'll be a separate video series. But at least this gives you an idea of what implant size is appropriate, right? So if you're going to do this freehand, you can at least know that, hey, a 5.2 by 12 will work. And I want to zoom in on something too. Notice that thin outline. If you remember back to the first video about the settings, that is my security zone. So if I go to my implants and I toggle off my security zone, you notice that that will disappear. See how that's gone now? So that is what that little outline is, security zone. And you can change the size of it. In this case, it's 1.5 millimeters. So for me, that's nice because I want to make sure I have 1.5 millimeters of bone surrounding my implant. And here I can make sure that that entire thin box outline is within bone. Okay, so that's one nice thing about that security zone, but just so you know what that is. So if I want to toggle back to the other layout, I can make sure in one screen I like the angles of mesodistal and buccolingual. Okay, and we'll hit apply. So now I have two implants planned on this case, and we have a couple things that I want to showcase now on the 3D rendering phase. So we talked earlier about the different rendering options for the 3D rendering, the X-ray, the bone, the soft tissue, and the tooth, and turning it off with the X. And generally, once you have an intraoral scan overlaid, you don't need the rendering anymore because this is more accurate. But now we have these other buttons. And here, this button is show to hide implants. So that will toggle on and off all of your implants. If you chose abutments, so if your implant line supplied the abutments, you can toggle on and off abutments for multi-units or tie bases, just to kind of showcase. If you're doing guided surgery, you can turn on and off your guided sleeves. Okay, so turning off guide sleeves. And then here we have anatomy. So whatever we named anatomy, toggle on and off. And here we have prosthetics, our wax up teeth. So if we wanted to, for instance, say, hey, I want to be able to see kind of where this implant's coming out exactly in the soft tissue, I can turn off my wax up and see where that's coming out there. I can turn my implant on, turn my implant off. If I'm doing guided surgery, perhaps I turn the sleeve on and make sure that's going to fit in the patient's mouth and the sleeve is not going to impinge on something. Perhaps I want to make this a little bit transparent so I can see roughly how deep it is below the gum line. You know, any number of things that we can really look at here. Okay, let's say that we have I'm going to move my face over to here. Let's say we're doing an overdenture, just for argument's sake, and we want to make sure that these are parallel implants. Okay, I can right-click on either implant, and one of the options is to set the axis parallel to, and it'll come up with other implants I have. So maybe a better solution would be like a bridge. Let's say we're doing a bridge from 19 to 21. Okay, so let's go ahead and move our implant to number 21. All right, it's going to give me some errors. I'm going to change, right-click 29, change the tooth number to 21. Okay, and in any of these screens, I can come in here and we can fine-tune. We can redo this. Okay, so we'll turn off our guide sleeves for now. So here's our plan. We want to do a bridge. The patient's going to lose these 2 teeth, for instance. And right now, the way I have it planned, the implants are a little bit divergent. Okay, and I want to make sure they're perfectly parallel because I want to see if that's possible and make my bridge a lot easier to see and so on. So let's say that we like number 19 better as far as the angle goes. We can right-click either on the implant here, we can right-click on the implant here, we can right-click on the implant kind of anywhere, and we can hit Set Access Parallel To and choose whatever one we want to make it parallel to. So in this case, number 19. And you'll see it uprighted the implant, and now they're exactly parallel to each other. So especially useful for guided surgery when we're setting things up to be parallel. Could be useful for full arch overdentures or bridges or so on like that. But that's a nice thing to even be able to plan for. Okay, let's say we want to know how far divergent they are. It's something we cannot make perfectly parallel. So let's go ahead and drag number 21 again this way. And we'll just say that's what we have to do. Okay, I can select number 19, and this little button here says Select Reference Implant, and that is now the implant that I'm going to measure every other implant off of. Below that, you see an angle. This is a maximum divergence angle, and using my mouse wheel or clicking and dragging, I can drag this down 14 degrees, 13 degrees, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. 4, 3. Okay, and see how that turns red at 3 and turns yellow at 4? So that tells me that these implants are 3 degrees divergent. So that's a very minor divergence for this example, but if you're doing a locator denture, for instance, and you want to stay within 15 degrees, you can set this to 15, choose your reference implant, and just make sure that none of them are giving you that error, that red air anymore. So a couple of different kind of tools that you can work with there. Okay, that's it for mostly of the simple implant planning stuff. Keep in mind you can change the implant from any of these screens. You can drag, drop, twist, and so on. And your model editing from right-clicking on most things will give you more options. Okay, we'll get into more advanced stuff when we talk about guided implants and dual scans and whatnot in a different video series. But after this video, we should feel pretty comfortable loading a scan, positioning a patient, reading the scan, drawing a panoramic curve, mapping a nerve if necessary, doing a wax up if desired, and then planning and placing an implant digitally on the x-ray to give us an idea of size, shape, positioning, and so on. Our last video is going to be on the Reports and Exports tab, and we're going to showcase kind of what kind of things we can export from the software to help us on the day of surgery. Okay?